The day my mother delivered her ultimatum changed the course of my life forever. She sat across from me in the sunlit study of our family estate just outside Atlanta, her eyes cold as steel and her voice steady as she said I would lose everything: the trust funds, the properties, the shares in the family company, if I did not end my relationship with Kennedy immediately and return to the life she had planned for me. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the desk, but I met her gaze and told her that Kennedy was not a phase or a mistake, but the person who made me feel whole in a world of pretense. The argument had started over dinner when she brought up the annual family gala, and casually mentioned that certain board members had been asking about my single status again. I had tried to steer the conversation away, but she pressed harder until I finally admitted that Kennedy and I had been living together for over a year in our little apartment downtown. Her face hardened in an instant, and the rest of the evening became a blur of raised voices, accusations, and tears that I refused to let fall in front of her. She called Kennedy a distraction, a gold digger in disguise, someone who would ruin the family name we had spent generations building in the Atlanta business community. I reminded her that Dad had never once questioned my choices before he passed, but she shot back that Dad was gone, and she was the one left holding the legacy together. Every word cut deeper because I knew how much she had sacrificed after his death to keep the real estate empire afloat, and how she saw my relationship as the final crack in the foundation she was desperately trying to repair. When I stood up and said I would not choose between my family and my love, she slammed the folder with the will copies on the table and told me to leave before she changed her mind about even letting me walk out with the car she had given me for graduation. The drive back to the city was a haze of rain streaking the windshield and my mind racing through every memory of Kennedy, the way her laugh filled the quiet moments, the late nights we spent talking about our dreams of building a life free from the weight of expectations. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of our building, my chest felt tight with the fear that maybe Mom was right, that love like ours came with a price too high for someone raised in privilege to truly understand. I barely slept that night, tossing between anger at her control and the gnawing doubt about what I was willing to sacrifice. The next morning, as I sat at our small kitchen table staring at a cold cup of coffee, the phone rang and the voice on the other end introduced herself as a senior advisor from the bank handling my father's estate. She asked if I was Nevaeh Thompson, and when I confirmed, she continued with the words that stopped my heart. Mom said I'd lose it all, but here was the bank confirming that the inheritance account was set up jointly in my name and Kennedy Hayes' name, with access already granted and no restrictions noted in the documents. I sat there stunned, unable to process how my late father, who had always been the quiet, supportive one, could have done this without telling Mom or me. The advisor asked for verification of details, and I mumbled yes while my mind spun with possibilities. Was this a mistake, a clerical error, or something Dad had planned, knowing the kind of pressure Mom would put on me? I hung up and immediately dialed Kennedy, who was at her teaching job at the local elementary school, but she picked up on the second ring, sensing something in my voice. When I told her about the call, she went silent for a long moment, then whispered that we needed to meet right away because this changed everything and not necessarily for the better. By the time she arrived home an hour later, I had paced the living room so many times the rug looked worn. We sat on the couch holding hands as I recounted the entire confrontation with Mom and the shocking bank confirmation. Kennedy listened with her usual calm, her dark eyes reflecting both hope and worry. She reminded me that her own family had cut ties years ago when she came out, so she understood the fear of losing everything, but she also knew that accepting money tied to my father's secret approval might come with strings we could not see yet. We talked for hours about the moral weight of it all, whether using the funds would betray Mom's trust or honor Dad's apparent wish for my happiness. The conversation turned to our future, the small life we had built together on my marketing salary, and her teaching income, the dreams of maybe starting a nonprofit one day to help young people facing similar family struggles. By evening, we decided to consult a lawyer friend to understand the legal standing, but deep down, I felt the first cracks of internal conflict, because part of me wondered if fighting for this inheritance would turn our love into something tainted by money and resentment. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, replaying Mom's face and the bank call, realizing that the real battle was only beginning and the price of my choices would be measured not just in dollars but in the relationships I might never repair. The following days brought more calls from Mom demanding I come home and sign papers to contest the account, but I refused each time, feeling the weight of her disappointment like a physical force pressing on my chest. Kennedy tried to reassure me, but I could see the strain in her too, the way she checked her phone more often, wondering if this would drag her into a world she had escaped. We went for a walk in the park near our building, the same one where we had our first real date, And for a moment the tension lifted as we watched kids playing and talked about what kind of future we wanted if the money was truly ours. Yet even in that quiet moment the doubt lingered because I knew that standing by Kennedy meant standing against the only family I had left, and the cost of that decision was already starting to show in the sleepless nights and the knot of anxiety that never fully left my stomach. The lawyer confirmed the account was legitimate and irrevocable, which only fueled Mom's fury when she found out, leading to a heated voicemail where she accused me of manipulating Dad in his final months. I listened to it twice before deleting it, but the words stayed with me, feeding the internal voice that questioned if my love was worth fracturing the family bond forever. Kennedy suggested we take a day to process without phones, and we drove out to a quiet lake outside the city where we sat on the dock talking about our first meeting at the charity fundraiser where she had been volunteering and I had been there representing the family company. She had challenged me on the company's lack of diversity programs, and instead of getting defensive I had listened, and that conversation had sparked something real between us. Remembering that moment reminded me why I had chosen her over the safe path, but it also highlighted the gulf between my privileged upbringing and her harder road, and I wondered if the inheritance would widen that gulf or help bridge it. As the sun set over the water, we made a pact to face whatever came together no matter the price, and for the first time that week I felt a flicker of strength amid the fear. Yet as we drove back, the reality waited in the form of a certified letter from Mom's attorney outlining the steps to contest the joint account and warning of the personal and professional consequences if I continued down this path. The tension was building, and I knew that every decision from here on would carry a cost I could not yet fully calculate, but I was determined to find out what I was truly made of. The certified letter from Mom's attorney arrived like a storm cloud over our already fragile peace, and as I read the legal jargon outlining the potential challenges to the joint inheritance, I felt the first real wave of panic settle in my bones. Kennedy stood behind me, reading over my shoulder, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, as she pointed out the clauses that mentioned undue influence and questioned the validity of Dad's intentions without witnesses present at the time of the amendment. We both knew this was Mom's way of fighting back, not just for the money, but for the control she felt slipping away, and the realization that our love was now a legal battlefield made the emotional toll even heavier. I called the lawyer friend again, and he advised us to gather any evidence of Dad's state of mind, but warned that court battles like this could drag on for years, draining both finances and sanity. That afternoon I sat at my desk at the marketing firm trying to focus on a campaign pitch, but my mind kept drifting to the confrontation ahead, and the moral dilemma of fighting my own mother for money that might have been meant to buy my compliance in the first place. Kennedy texted me during her lunch break, reminding me that we did not have to use a dime of it if it felt wrong, but the practical side of me knew that rejecting it outright would mean giving up opportunities for the nonprofit we dreamed about, helping kids like the one she taught who faced rejection at home. The internal conflict raged as I weighed loyalty to family against the authenticity I had fought so hard to claim, and by the time I left the office the guilt was so thick it felt like I was carrying an extra weight on my shoulders. When I got home, Kennedy had prepared a simple dinner, and we ate in silence at first until she finally spoke about her own past, the way her parents had stopped speaking to her the day she came out, and how she had built her life from nothing without regret. Her words both comforted and challenged me because I saw in her strength the possibility of a future without the family safety net. But I also saw the quiet pain she still carried from that loss, and I wondered if I was ready to pay the same price. The next day Mom showed up unannounced at our apartment, building her designer coat, a stark contrast to the modest lobby. And when I buzzed her up, the confrontation that followed was raw and unfiltered. She accused Kennedy of turning me against her, of being the reason I had distanced myself from the family events and traditions that defined who we were. Kennedy stood her ground calmly, explaining that she loved me for who I was, not for the money, but Mom dismissed it as naive and turned her anger back on me, asking how I could choose a stranger over the woman who had given me everything. The words stung because deep down I knew Mom had sacrificed her own dreams to raise me after Dad died, and the guilt twisted in my gut as I defended our relationship with every ounce of conviction I could muster. After she left, slamming the door behind her, Kennedy and I sat on the floor in the living room processing the damage, and I broke down, admitting that part of me feared becoming the villain in my family's story, the ungrateful daughter who traded blood for love. Kennedy held me through the tears and shared her own fears that the money would always be a shadow between us, making her feel like an intruder in a world she did not belong to. That conversation lasted late into the night as we dissected every possible outcome: the loss of contact with my sister, who had already started siding with Mom, the whispers at family gatherings I would miss, and the professional repercussions if Mom used her influence in Atlanta circles to blackball me. The next morning brought the first public hint of backlash when a cousin texted me asking if the rumors were true that I was fighting Mom over money because of my lifestyle, and the message hit like a slap because it showed how quickly the private family drama was spreading through the social network that had once been my support system. I showed Kennedy the text and we decided to take a drive to clear our heads, stopping at a small cafe where we talked about the moral cost of accepting the inheritance, knowing it would fracture the family further. I realized in that moment that every choice carried a price. The decision to stand firm meant losing pieces of my past, but backing down would mean losing myself and the love that had given me purpose. As the days turned into a week of tense phone calls and lawyer meetings, the tension escalated when my sister called me directly, her voice laced with disappointment as she echoed Mom's warnings and revealed that she had spoken to board members about my situation, potentially jeopardizing my position at the company. The betrayal from someone I had grown up with cut deeper than Mom's anger, and I spent the evening in silence, questioning if my pursuit of happiness was worth alienating the people who shared my blood. Kennedy suggested we document everything for the legal team, but I could see the weariness in her eyes, the way this fight was testing her patience and her belief that love should not require such battles. We spent that weekend trying to reclaim normalcy by volunteering at the school where she taught, helping with an after-school program for at-risk kids. And in those moments, surrounded by laughter and small victories, I felt a glimpse of the life we could build together if we survived this storm. Yet even as I watched her interact with the children, the internal voice reminded me of the family I was risking, and the awakening began to stir that perhaps the true inheritance was not the money but the strength I was discovering in choosing my truth. The following Monday, the lawyer informed us that Mom had filed the initial paperwork to contest the account, and the reality of a prolonged legal fight settled over us like a heavy fog, forcing us to confront the possibility that this battle could consume years of our lives. I lay awake that night beside Kennedy, listening to her steady breathing, and wondering if the cost of my decisions would eventually break us or forge us into something unbreakable, but the fear of the unknown kept sleep at bay until dawn. The pressure continued to build with each passing day as work colleagues started giving me odd looks after word spread through the industry grapevine, and I found myself isolated in meetings where once I had been included. The social prejudice I had only heard about in stories was now my reality, and it forced me to examine my own privileges and the naivety with which I had assumed love would shield me from judgment. Kennedy noticed the change in me, and we had another deep talk where she admitted her own insecurities about being seen as the outsider who caused all this drama, and together we navigated the moral maze of whether to fight back publicly or keep our heads down. Each decision felt like walking a tightrope where one wrong step could send everything crashing down, and the weight of those choices pressed on us both, but we held on, refusing to let the external forces define our bond. As the file closed on that second week, I knew the storm was far from over, and the real tests of character and commitment were yet to come. The rumors had spread faster than I could have imagined, turning what started as a family dispute into a whispered scandal within Atlanta social circles. And when I walked into the office on Monday, the sideways glances from colleagues confirmed that the story had reached my workplace. A senior partner pulled me aside after the morning meeting and mentioned in careful language that the board was concerned about family stability affecting business image, and I felt the ground shift under me as the professional consequences of my personal life became real. I called Kennedy during my lunch break, my voice shaking as I described the conversation, and she listened quietly before suggesting we meet after work to talk strategy, because ignoring the backlash would only make it worse. That evening in our apartment, we laid out all the pieces: the legal filings from Mom, the texts from relatives, the work tension, and the growing fear that our quiet life was being dismantled piece by piece. The moral dilemma weighed heaviest on me because fighting back meant dragging the family name through public scrutiny, while staying silent felt like surrendering my right to exist as I was. Kennedy shared stories from her past when she had faced similar isolation at her first teaching job, and how she had learned to build her own support network. But her words also highlighted the difference in our starting points. My safety net had been privilege, hers resilience, and that contrast fueled my internal struggle over whether the inheritance was a gift or a curse that would always remind us of the divide. We decided to attend a small community event for LGBTQ allies the next weekend, hoping to find solidarity, but even there the shadow followed when an acquaintance asked if I was the one in the Thompson family drama, and the question stung like a reminder that privacy was a luxury I no longer had. The confrontation with my sister escalated the following Tuesday when she showed up at the apartment unannounced, her face a mask of concern mixed with judgment as she pleaded with me to reconsider for the sake of our aging grandmother who was heartbroken over the rift. Her words triggered a flood of memories from childhood summers at the lake house, and I nearly broke under the guilt until Kennedy stepped in, calmly explaining that forcing me to choose was the real betrayal. The argument ended with my sister leaving in tears, and me collapsing on the couch questioning if my stand for love was causing more pain than it was worth. The psychological toll mounted as sleepless nights turned into anxiety-filled days, and I started seeing a therapist recommended by a friend to unpack the layers of family loyalty versus self-acceptance. In those sessions I explored the deep-seated fear that choosing Kennedy meant I was selfish, and the therapist helped me reframe it as an act of courage. But the work was exhausting, and the cost showed in my strained interactions with Kennedy, who was carrying her own burden of feeling responsible for the chaos. One evening after a particularly hard therapy session, we sat on the balcony overlooking the city lights, and I admitted that part of me wondered if walking away from the money would restore peace, but Kennedy reminded me that the issue was never just the money, it was the right to love without conditions. Her insight sparked a turning point in my thinking, and I began to see the awakening within me. The realization that true family was not defined by blood or bank accounts, but by acceptance, and that understanding gave me the strength to face the next wave of pressure. The public scandal broke the following week when a local society blog posted a vague, but recognizable story about a prominent family divided over a same-sex relationship, and the comments section filled with judgment that targeted both Kennedy and me. The online backlash spilled into real life when a former classmate messaged me expressing disappointment, and I spent hours staring at the screen feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way I had never experienced. Kennedy suggested we limit social media and focus on our immediate circle, but the isolation grew as invitations to events dried up, and even close friends hesitated to take sides. The moral conflict deepened when Mom sent a letter through her lawyer offering a settlement if I agreed to end the relationship and sign over any claim to the joint account. The proposal was tempting in its promise of restored family ties, but accepting it would mean denying the core of who I was, and the price of that denial felt unbearable. We discussed it late into the night, weighing the practical benefits against the emotional cost, and ultimately decided to reject it, because compromising now would set a precedent for future concessions that could erode our foundation. That decision brought a sense of empowerment, but also a fresh wave of sadness, as I mourned the version of my life where family gatherings were simple and unquestioned. The tension reached a new high when Kennedy faced her own challenge at school. A parent complained about her involvement in diversity discussions, linking it to the public story, and the principal called her in for a meeting that left her shaken. Seeing her hurt because of my family drama intensified my guilt, and we spent the weekend processing the shared sacrifices our love demanded, the lost connections, the questioned careers, and the constant need to prove our worth. In the quiet moments I reflected on the betrayals, small and large, from relatives who chose sides without hearing my story, and the awakening continued as I recognized that standing firm was not just about Kennedy, but about claiming my right to a life without shame. As the month drew to a close, the legal team prepared for the first hearing, and I knew the coming weeks would test every ounce of resolve we had built, but the bond between us felt stronger, forged in the fire of these trials, and ready for whatever came next. The first court hearing loomed like a dark cloud on the horizon, and as we prepared the paperwork with our lawyer, the reality of airing our private pain in a public forum settled heavily on both of us. Mom arrived at the courthouse with her attorney and my sister in tow, her posture rigid and her eyes avoiding mine as the judge reviewed the initial motions, and I felt the sting of her rejection like a fresh wound. The session was brief, but the tension in the room was thick, and afterward in the hallway Mom cornered me for a moment, her voice low as she asked if I was really willing to destroy everything for this, and I replied that the destruction had started the day she issued her ultimatum. The exchange left me drained, and Kennedy, who had waited outside, pulled me into a hug as we walked to the car, the simple gesture a reminder that some supports were worth every battle. Back at the apartment we debriefed the day, and the moral dilemma resurfaced because part of me saw Mom's pain as a mother fighting for what she believed was right, while another part recognized the prejudice that blinded her to my happiness. Kennedy suggested we write letters to family members explaining our side without expecting immediate change, and we spent the evening drafting words that poured out years of unspoken feelings, the love, the hurt, the hope for understanding. Sending those letters felt like a risk but also an act of courage, and the responses that trickled in over the following days ranged from silence to cautious support from a distant aunt who admitted her own past struggles. The positive note gave me hope, but the betrayal came from an unexpected source when a longtime family friend leaked details from the hearing to the press, turning the story into a minor local headline that portrayed me as the rebellious heir and Kennedy as the opportunist. The article spread quickly, and the online comments were vicious enough to make me close my laptop in disgust. The societal prejudice I had read about was now personal, and it forced me to confront how much of my identity had been protected by my family's status. Kennedy bore the brunt at work again with more parent inquiries, and we discussed the possibility of her taking a leave to avoid further stress, but she refused, saying that hiding would only validate the hate. Her strength inspired me, and in my next therapy session, I explored the guilt that had been my constant companion, realizing that it stemmed from years of internalizing the idea that my happiness came second to family harmony. The awakening deepened as I began to separate my worth from my mother's approval, and that shift brought both relief and grief for the relationship we might never regain. A major confrontation unfolded the following weekend, when Mom invited me to a private lunch at her favorite restaurant, hoping to appeal to reason without lawyers present. I agreed against Kennedy's caution, and the meeting started civilly with Mom sharing memories of Dad and how he had always wanted the best for me, but it quickly turned when she presented a revised settlement offer that included a substantial sum if I agreed to a no-contact clause with Kennedy for 5 years. The proposal felt like a knife to the heart because it reduced my love to a transaction, and I stood up mid-sentence, telling her that no amount of money could buy the peace she was asking me to sacrifice. She called after me as I left, but I kept walking, the tears blurring my vision, until I reached the car where Kennedy was waiting, having sensed I might need support. We drove in silence for a while until I broke down describing the offer, and she held my hand without judgment, her presence the anchor I needed in the storm. That night we talked about the heavy price we were both paying, the lost family connections for me, the professional uncertainty for her, and the constant emotional labor of defending our right to exist. The discussion turned to our future plans, and we made a pact to prioritize our mental health by setting boundaries and seeking joy in small things like weekend hikes and cooking together. The betrayal escalated when my sister publicly sided with Mom in a social media post that was shared widely among our circle, and the resulting flood of messages left me feeling utterly alone, except for Kennedy, who reminded me that real family chose you every day. The internal conflict reached its peak during a sleepless night when I considered for a fleeting moment if ending things would restore the peace, but the thought vanished as quickly as it came because the idea of losing Kennedy was more terrifying than any external pressure. The awakening solidified in that moment, the understanding that my choices were not selfish but necessary for a life of integrity, and I woke Kennedy to share the realization, which brought us closer than ever. As the legal process moved to discovery phase, the stress tested us daily, but we faced each document review and witness statement with a united front, the costs mounting in therapy bills, lost opportunities, and strained nerves, but the growth was undeniable. A small victory came when the judge denied Mom's request for an immediate freeze on the account, giving us breathing room, and we celebrated quietly with a home-cooked meal that felt like a declaration of resilience. Yet the drama continued when a former colleague reached out with an offer to join a rival firm that valued diversity. The opportunity was tempting, but accepting it meant fully stepping away from the family legacy, and I agonized over the decision for days until Kennedy helped me see it as another step toward independence. I accepted the offer, and the change brought new energy, but also the pain of closing a chapter tied to my father. The month ended with a quiet evening where we reflected on how far we had come. The betrayals had tested us, the moral choices had shaped us, and the sacrifices had revealed the depth of our commitment. The road ahead remained uncertain, but the foundation we had built felt solid enough to withstand the remaining storms. The new job at the rival firm started with a mix of excitement and apprehension as I navigated the orientation sessions and team meetings where my personal story was known, but never mentioned directly. The professional respect felt earned rather than inherited, and that distinction brought a quiet sense of pride. Kennedy continued at the school despite the ongoing challenges, and we supported each other through the long days by sharing evening walks where we processed the latest developments in the legal case. The discovery phase revealed emails from Dad to his lawyer expressing his hope that I would find happiness on my own terms, and reading those words brought both comfort and fresh grief, because it confirmed his quiet acceptance that Mom had never known about. The evidence strengthened our position, but it also intensified the family rift when Mom learned of the documents and sent a scathing message accusing me of exploiting Dad's illness. The accusation hurt deeply, and I spent a day in silence wrestling with the moral question of whether fighting for the truth was worth the additional pain it caused her. Kennedy encouraged me to respond with honesty rather than anger, and I drafted a letter outlining my love for both parents and the sadness that this battle had become necessary. The response was silence, but I felt a small release in having spoken my truth without expectation. The crisis peaked when Mom suffered a mild health scare linked to stress, and my sister called me in a panic demanding I come to the hospital to make amends before it was too late. The call triggered every guilt I had buried, and I drove to the hospital with Kennedy by my side the entire ride, a battle between the urge to reconcile and the fear of being manipulated again. At the hospital, Mom looked frail in the bed, but her eyes hardened when she saw Kennedy, and she asked me to send her out so we could talk alone. The conversation that followed was the most honest we had ever had. She admitted her fear of losing me the way she had lost Dad, and her belief that protecting the family image was the only way to keep us safe. I listened and then shared my own fears, the loneliness of being the different one, the pressure to hide, and the joy I had found in living openly with Kennedy. Tears were shed on both sides, but when she asked me to choose family, I stood firm, explaining that true family would not force such a choice, and the moment ended with her turning away in disappointment. Leaving the hospital, I felt the weight of that exchange like a physical burden, but also a strange clarity that I had honored both my love and my honesty. Kennedy waited in the car, and we drove home in reflective silence, stopping for coffee, where we talked about the price of authenticity, the lost closeness with Mom, and the strength we had gained. The legal team used the hospital incident to request mediation, and the session was scheduled for the following week, with both sides agreeing to neutral ground. In preparation, we role-played possible scenarios, and I practiced voicing my boundaries without aggression. The exercise revealed how much I had grown in handling conflict, and Kennedy praised my progress, which boosted my confidence. The mediation day arrived with heavy rain mirroring the emotional atmosphere, and as we sat across from Mom and her team, the mediator guided us through the issues with calm questions. Mom expressed her grief over the family division, and I responded with my need for acceptance. The exchange was tense, but productive, leading to a partial agreement where the inheritance would remain joint, but with conditions on usage for joint projects only. The compromise felt like a small victory, but the emotional cost was evident in Mom's tired expression, and my own mixed feelings of relief and sadness. After the session, Kennedy and I went to the park where we had shared our happy moments, and we sat on a bench processing the day. The awakening was complete in recognizing that peace did not mean total reconciliation, but mutual respect for boundaries. The following weeks brought a tentative calm as I settled into the new job, and Kennedy received support from her principal after the complaints died down. We started planning the nonprofit in earnest, using part of the inheritance for initial setup, and the work felt purposeful, a way to turn our pain into something positive for others. The family silence continued except for occasional updates from my sister, who remained distant, but no longer hostile, and I accepted that some relationships might take years to heal, if ever. A moment of doubt crept in when I received a photo from a cousin of the family at a gathering. I was not invited to. The image stung, but Kennedy reminded me that my place was with her, building new traditions. The sacrifice was real, the missed holidays, the empty seat at tables, but the reward was a life aligned with my values, and that balance kept me grounded. The crisis had tested every part of us, and we emerged with deeper understanding of the costs and the courage required to pay them. As the legal matters wrapped up, we took a short trip to the coast for rest, and in the quiet waves I reflected on the journey from the initial ultimatum to this point of cautious peace. The path had been paved with confrontations, betrayals, and awakenings, but it had led to a version of myself I could respect. The final hearing confirmed the agreement, and we left the courthouse hand in hand, ready for the next chapter, whatever it held. With the legal agreement signed and the inheritance secured under joint terms, life began to settle into a new rhythm that felt both foreign and liberating, as we focused on launching the nonprofit and navigating our careers without the constant shadow of court dates. The work with the organization brought fulfillment as we helped young people facing family rejection, and in their stories I saw echoes of my own journey, the pain, the doubt, the eventual strength, and it reinforced that my choices had ripple effects beyond my own life. Mom remained distant, sending only occasional updates through lawyers about family matters, but the complete silence from her personal side was a wound that healed slowly with time and therapy. Kennedy and I grew even closer through the process, our conversations deeper, our support unwavering, and the romantic moments we carved out became lifelines that reminded us why we had fought so hard. One evening as we walked through the same park where the third scene of our story would have been captured in a snapshot of happiness, we stopped under the trees, and she told me how proud she was of the woman I had become, the one who chose love despite the cost. Her words filled me with a warmth that eased the lingering guilt, and I realized that the price we paid, the estranged family ties, the social whispers, the internal battles, had been worth it for the authenticity we now lived every day. The nonprofit gained traction with local grants and media coverage that focused on the positive impact, rather than the family drama, and that shift allowed us to move forward, without the past defining us. My sister reached out once with a tentative message asking for coffee, and though the meeting was awkward, it opened a small door to future conversations without pressure to choose sides. The moral questions that had haunted me early on found answers in the quiet moments of reflection. I understood that right and wrong were not black and white, but shaped by context and courage, and my decision to stand with Kennedy had been the right one for me, even if it hurt others. The costs remained visible in the empty chair at holiday tables and the careful wording in family updates, but they were balanced by the life we were building, filled with purpose and mutual respect. As the seasons changed, we celebrated small wins like the first group of kids graduating from our program, and the expansion of our apartment to accommodate a home office for the nonprofit. The journey had transformed us both, Kennedy more confident in her place in my world, and me more grounded in my identity, free from the need for approval. Looking back at the shocking ultimatum and the unexpected bank confirmation, I saw them as the catalyst that forced me to define my own path, and the awakening that followed was the greatest gift of all. In the end, the love we shared had proven resilient against every obstacle, and the happiness we found in each other was the true inheritance worth every sacrifice. When forced to choose between family approval and authentic love, was defying my mother the right decision despite the irreversible pain it caused, or did the cost prove that some traditions should never be challenged?